The Letter, the Witch, and the Ring by John Bellairs, Chapter 1. No, 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 no! I will not wear that silly uniform! Rosarita Pottinger stood in the middle of her bedroom floor. She was in her underwear, and she was glaring angrily at her mother, who held in her arms a freshly ironed Girl Scout uniform. Well, then, what am I going to do with it? Mrs. Potter asked wearily. Throw it out! Rosarita screamed. She grabbed the uniform from her mother and flung it to the floor. Tears were in Rosarita's eyes now. Her face felt hot and flushed. Take it out and put it on a scarecrow or something. I tell you once and for all, Mother, I am not going to be a Girl Scout or a campfire girl. I am not going to camp Kitch Itty Kippy this summer and roast marshmallows and sing happy songs. I'm going to spend this whole rotten summer batting a tennis ball against the side of the house until I'm sick, and so sick. And Rosarita broke down. She put her hands over her face and cried. Mrs. Pottinger put her arm around Rosarita and helped her sit down on the bed. There, she said, patting Rosarita's shoulder. It's not so bad as all that. Rosarita flung her hands away from her face. She tore off her glasses and sat staring blearily at her mother. Oh, yes, it is, Mom. It's every bit as bad as all that. It's awful. I wanted to spend the summer with Louis and have a good time, and now he's going to that dumb Boy Scout camp. He'll be out there till school starts again, and I'm stuck here in this dumb town with nothing to do and nobody to have fun with. Mrs. Pottinger sighed. Well, maybe you can find another boyfriend. Rosarita put her glasses back on and gave her mother a dirty look. Mom, how many times do I have to tell you Louis isn't my boyfriend? He's my best friend, just like Marie Gallagher used to be. I don't see why it should have to be any different just because he's a boy and I'm a girl. Mrs. Pottinger smiled patiently at her daughter. Well, my dear, it is different, and it's something you've got to understand. Louis is 12 now, and you're 13. You and I are going to have a little talk on this subject. Rosarita turned away and watched a fly that was buzzing around on the window screen. Oh, Mom, I don't want to have a little talk. Not now, anyway. I just want you to leave me alone. Mrs. Pottinger shrugged her shoulders and got up. Very well, Rosarita, whatever you want. By the way, what are you giving Louis as a going-away present? I bought him a genuine official Boy Scout fire-starting kit, said Rosarita sullenly. And you know what? I hope he sets fire to himself with it and gets third-degree burns. Now, Rosarita, said her mother soothingly, you know very well you don't want anything like that. I don't, huh? Well, let me tell you something, Mom. I'll see you later, Rosarita, said her mother, cutting her off. Mrs. Pottinger didn't want to listen to another of her daughter's ill-tempered outbursts. She was afraid that if she did, she might lose her temper herself. Mrs. Pottinger got up and left the room. Closing the door softly behind her, Rosarita was alone. She threw herself down on the bed and cried. She cried for quite a while, but instead of feeling better after her cry, she felt worse. Rosarita got up and glanced wildly around the room, searching for something that might cheer her up. Maybe she could get out her bat and ball and go down to the athletic field and hit some flies. That usually made her feel good. She opened the door of her closet, and immediately another wave of sadness swept over her. There, hanging forlornly on a nail, was her black beanie. She had worn it for years, but now it seemed silly to her. For half a year, the black beanie had been hanging in the closet, gathering dust. Now, for some reason, the sight of it made Rosarita burst into tears again. What was wrong with her? Rosarita would have given a lot to know. Maybe it had something to do with being 13. She was a teenager now and not a kid. Next fall, she would be in the 7th grade. 7th and 8th grades were in junior high. The junior high kids went to school in a big black stone building next to the high school. They had lockers in the halls, like the high school kids. They even had their own gym where they had Saturday night dances, but Rosarita didn't want to go to dances. She didn't want to go on dates with Louis or anybody else. All she wanted was to keep on being a kid. She wanted to play baseball and climb trees and build ship models with Louis. She looked forward to junior high about as much as she looked forward to a visit from the dentist. Rosarita closed the closet door and turned away. As she turned, she happened to catch sight of herself in the mirror. She saw a tall, skinny, homely girl with black, stringy hair and eyelashes. I should have been a boy, Rosarita thought. Homely boys didn't have as many problems as homely girls did. Also, boys could go to Boy Scout camp and girls couldn't. Boys could get together for a game of flies and grounders and nobody thought there was anything strange about it. Boys didn't have to wear nylons and pleated skirts and starched blouses to church on Sunday. As far as Rosarita was concerned, boys really had the life. But she had been born a girl, and there didn't seem to be much she could do about it. Rosarita went over to the goldfish tank to feed her fish. She started to whistle and did a little dance around the room. Outside, it was a beautiful day. The sun was shining. People were watering their lawns, and kids were riding their bikes. Maybe if she didn't think about her problems, they would go away. It might turn out to be a nice summer after all. That night, Rosarita went to Lewis's going away to camp party. She didn't really want to go, but she figured she had to. Lewis was still her best friend, even though he was leaving her in the lurch by going away to camp, and she didn't want to hurt his feelings. Lewis lived in a big old house up on High Street. He lived with his Uncle Jonathan, who was a wizard, and the lady next door, Mrs. Zimmerman, was a witch. Jonathan and Mrs. Zimmerman didn't run around in black robes waving wands, but they did know how to do magic. Rosarita figured that Mrs. Zimmerman knew more magic than Jonathan did, but she didn't show off so much. The party that night turned out to be so much fun that Rosarita forgot all about her troubles. She even forgot that she was supposed to be mad at Lewis. Mrs. Zimmerman taught Lewis and Rosarita a couple of new card games, Clabberjass and Six-Pack Bezqui, Winston Churchill's favorite card game. And Jonathan did one of his magic illusions, where he made everyone think that they were stumping across the floor of the Atlantic in diving suits. They visited some sunken galleons and the wreck of the Titanic, and even watched an octopus fight. Then the show was over, and it was time for lemonade and chocolate chip cookies. Everyone went out on the front porch and ate and drank and swung on the glider and laughed and talked until it was very late. After the party was over around midnight, Rosarita was sitting in Mrs. Zimmerman's kitchen. She was staying over at Mrs. Zimmerman's house tonight, something that she always liked to do. Mrs. Zimmerman was really like a second mother to Rosarita. Rosarita felt that she could talk to her about practically anything. Now she was sitting there at the kitchen table, crumbling up the last chocolate chip cookie, and watching Mrs. Zimmerman as she stood at the stove in her purple summer nightgown. She was heating up some milk in a little pan. Mrs. Zimmerman always liked to drink hot milk to calm down after parties. She hated the taste of the stuff, but it was the only way she could get to sleep. "Some party, eh, Rosie?" she said, stirring the milk. "Yeah, it sure was. You know," said Mrs. Zimmerman, "I didn't even want there to be a party." Rosarita was startled. "You didn't?" "Nope, I was afraid your feelings would be hurt, even more than they already were, I mean, by Lewis's running out on you." Rosarita had not told Mrs. Zimmerman how she felt about Lewis's going away. She was amazed at how much Mrs. Zimmerman understood about her. Maybe it all went with being a witch. Mrs. Zimmerman tested the milk with her finger. Then she poured it into a mug that was decorated with little purple flowers. She sat down across from Rosarita and took a sip. "Ugh," said Mrs. Zimmerman, making a face. "I think the next time I'll slip myself a Mickey. But back to what you were talking about. You're pretty mad at Lewis, aren't you?" Rosarita stared at the table. "Yeah, I sure am. If I hadn't liked you and Uncle Jonathan so much, I don't think I'd have showed up at all." Mrs. Zimmerman chuckled. "It didn't look as if you and he were on the best of terms tonight. Do you have any idea why he's going to camp?" Rosarita crumbled up her cookie and thought. "Well," she said at last, "I guess he's tired of palling around with me, so he wants to be a big Eagle Scout or something." "You're about half right," said Mrs. Zimmerman. "That is, he does want to be a Boy Scout, but he isn't tired of being your friend. I think Lewis wishes very much that you could be going to camp with him." Rosarita blinked back tears. "He does?" Mrs. Zimmerman nodded. "Yes, and I'll tell you something else. He can't wait to get back and tell you about all the great things he's learned to do." Rosarita looked confused. "I don't understand. It sounds all mixed up. He likes me, so he's going away so he can tell me how much fun it was not to have me around?" Mrs. Zimmerman laughed. "Well, when you put it that way, my dear, it does sound mixed up, and I will admit that it's all mixed up in Lewis's head. He wants to learn how to tie knots and paddle canoes and hike through the wilderness, and he wants to come back and tell you so you'll think he's a real boy and like him even more than you do now." "I like him just the way he is. What's all this dumb stuff about being a real boy?" Mrs. Zimmerman sat back and sighed. There was a long silver case lying on the table. She picked it up and opened it. Inside was a row of dark brown cigars. "Do you mind if I smoke?" "Nope." Rosarita had seen Mrs. Zimmerman smoking cigars before. It had surprised her at first, but she had gotten used to it. As she watched, Mrs. Zimmerman bit the end off a cigar and spit it into the nearby wastebasket. Then she snapped her fingers, and a match appeared out of thin air. When the cigar was lit, Mrs. Zimmerman offered the match back to the air, and it disappeared. "Saves on ashtrays," she said, grinning. Mrs. Zimmerman took a few puffs. The smoke trailed off toward the open window in long, graceful swirls. There was a silence. Finally, Mrs. Zimmerman spoke again. "I know it's hard for you to understand, Rosarita. It's always hard to understand why someone is doing something that hurts us. But think of what Louis is like. He's a pudgy, shy boy who's always got his nose stuck in a book. He isn't good at sports, and he's scared of practically everything. Well, then look at you. You're a regular tomboy. You can climb trees, you can run fast, and the other day, when I was watching you, you struck out the side in that girls' softball game. You can do all the things that Louis can't do. Now do you see why he's going to camp?" Rosarita couldn't believe what she was saying, or what she was thinking. "To be like me?" Mrs. Zimmerman nodded. "Exactly, to be like you. And so you'll like him better. Of course, there are other reasons. For instance, he'd like to be like other boys. He wants to be normal. Most bright kids do." She smiled wryly and flicked cigar ashes into the sink. Rosarita looked sad. "If he'd asked me, I would have taught him a lot of stuff." "No good. He can't learn it from a girl. It would hurt his pride. But look, all this talk is besides the point. Louis is going off to camp tomorrow, and you're stuck here in New Zebedee with nothing to do. Well, now, it just so happens that the other day I received a most surprising letter from my late cousin Ole. Have I ever mentioned him to you?" Rosarita thought a second. "Gee, I don't think so. I didn't think I had. Well, Ole was a strange old duck, but—" Rosarita cut in. "Mrs. Zimmerman, you said late. Is he—" Mrs. Zimmerman nodded sadly. "Yes, I'm afraid Ole has gone to glory. He wrote me a letter while he was dying, and— Well, see here now. Why don't I just go get it and show it to you? It'll give you some idea of the kind of person he was." Mrs. Zimmerman got up and went downstairs. For a while, Rosarita heard her banging around and shuffling papers in her large, untidy study. When she came downstairs, she handed Rosarita a wrinkled piece of paper with several little holes punched in it. There was writing on the paper, but it was sloppy and shaky. Ink had been spilled in several places. "This letter came with a bunch of legal documents for me to sign," said Mrs. Zimmerman. "It's all a very odd business, and I'm not sure I know what to think. Anyhow, there's the letter. It's a mess, but you can read it. Oh, by the way, Ole always wrote with a quill pen when he felt he had something important to say. That's what made all those holes in the paper. Go ahead, read it." And we will pause there.